The glass slipped from his hand before he could stop it. Not because he was clumsy, not because he was drunk, but because the words that had just left his wife's mouth had drained every feeling from his body in a single second. And the only thing left standing was a man who finally, after 7 years, understood exactly where he stood. The room didn't go quiet. That would have been easier. Instead, laughter rippled through the crowd like a slow wave, the kind that starts at the back of a throat and then rolls forward until it becomes something no one can take back. 43 people. 43 people who knew his name, had eaten at his table, and had shaken his hand, and not one of them moved to stop it. Because Vanessa was speaking. And when Vanessa spoke, the world listened. She was standing at the center of the room in a white dress that caught the light like a spotlight had been built for her. Her wine glass was raised, her smile was wide, and her eyes found Daniel's across the room before she said it. That was the part that would haunt him the longest. She looked at him first. She made sure he was watching. "Let's be honest," she said, tilting her glass in the air. "Everything in this room, everything we're celebrating tonight, I built. Not us. Me." A beat of silence. Then someone laughed. Then someone else. Then the whole room was warm with it. "He's a good man," she added, her voice softening just enough to make it sound like kindness. "But let's not pretend he had anything to do with where I am today." Daniel stood very still. He didn't cry. He didn't shout. He didn't reach for another glass. He simply looked at his wife, the woman he had loved since she was 26 years old, and terrified and full of fire. And he felt something inside him close, like a door that had been left open for too long. Finally, quietly, shutting. Before we dive deeper, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We'd love to hear from you. And if you're new here, click the subscribe button so you never miss any of our upcoming videos. To understand what happened that night, and what would happen in the months that followed, you have to go back to the beginning. Daniel Okoye was not the kind of man people wrote stories about. He was the kind of man who made other people's stories possible. He grew up in a small house in Enugu, with a mother who worked double shifts, and a father who believed deeply that quiet consistency was the highest form of love. Daniel learned early that the loudest person in the room was rarely the most powerful. He learned to observe, he learned to wait, and he learned, above all else, that the most important things in life were built slowly, with both hands, in the dark. By the time he was 32, he had spent 8 years working in financial consulting, building a reputation for being the person who saw what others missed. He wasn't wealthy by any dramatic measure, but he was careful, meticulous, and quietly proud of the life he had assembled. And then he met Vanessa. She walked into a networking event in Lagos on a Tuesday evening, wearing a burnt orange blazer and an expression that dared anyone in the room to waste her time. She was 26, freshly returned from 2 years in London, and carrying a business plan for a fashion and lifestyle brand that she was convinced would change the industry. She had the vision. She had the energy. What she didn't have, not yet, was the foundation. Daniel found her compelling in a way he couldn't immediately name. Not just because she was beautiful, though she was, but because of the specific kind of hunger she carried, the hunger of someone who could see the future clearly, but hadn't yet figured out how to get there. He introduced himself. She looked him up and down with the full weight of her assessment and said, "You look like someone who pays attention." "I try to," he said. "Good," she replied. "I need that right now, more than anything else." They were married 2 years later. In the beginning, their partnership felt like something rare. Vanessa brought the fire. Daniel brought the structure. She would pitch to investors with breathtaking confidence. Daniel would sit beside her at the table afterward, quietly reviewing contracts, catching the clauses that would have cost her everything. She would dream of expansion. Daniel would run the numbers at midnight, mapping out a path that could actually hold the weight of her ambitions. When her first collection bombed, badly, publicly, humiliatingly, it was Daniel who sat with her on their kitchen floor at 2 a.m. and said, "We don't stop here." He pulled 300,000 naira from his personal savings, an amount he had spent years accumulating, and reinvested it into her second launch. When the second launch succeeded, Vanessa stood at a small press event and thanked her team, her mentors, her investors, and the city of Lagos. She didn't mention Daniel. He told himself it was an oversight. He told himself she was nervous. He told himself that the people who mattered already knew. He told himself a lot of things in those years. The brand grew. Van, as it came to be known, became one of the most recognizable fashion labels in West Africa within 5 years. Vanessa was on magazine covers. She was invited to speak at conferences in Dubai and London. She appeared on a Forbes list. She gave interviews in which she described herself as a self-made woman who had clawed her way to the top through sheer will and unshakable belief in herself. In every interview, Daniel was either absent from the story entirely or reduced to a single passing sentence: "I have a supportive husband." At home, things were different, but only in a way that someone living inside the marriage could see. He was still the one who managed their joint accounts, who made sure the household ran, who reviewed her contracts on weekends while she slept in. He was the one who took the calls when her business partner tried to pull out. He was the one who negotiated, quietly, without credit, the lease on her flagship store. But in public, in the story Vanessa told of her own life, he barely existed. The first time he brought it up, she laughed softly and said, "Daniel, you know I talk about you all the time privately. That's what matters." The second time, her voice had an edge. "Why do you need external validation? I thought you were above that." The third time, she didn't respond at all. She just looked at him with something that wasn't quite pity and wasn't quite contempt, and then turned back to her laptop. And Daniel, patient, quiet Daniel, learned to stop asking. The party was called a milestone celebration. 200 million naira in annual revenue. A new partnership with an international distributor. The beginning, Vanessa said in her opening remarks, of the global chapter. Daniel almost didn't go. He had spent the day reviewing documents, quietly, methodically, the way he did everything. Something had been shifting inside him for months, a slow tectonic movement that he hadn't yet named. He had started keeping records, not out of bitterness, not yet, just out of habit. The habit of a man who had always understood that foundations matter, and that the day comes when someone asks to see yours. He dressed carefully that evening. Dark suit. The tie she had bought him for his birthday 2 years ago, still crisp. He stood in front of the mirror for a moment longer than usual, and in that moment, something looked back at him that he hadn't seen in a long time. A man who knew exactly who he was. The venue was a converted warehouse in Victoria Island, filled with the kind of people who wore their success like armor: investors, fashion editors, influencers, the who's who of Lagos society. Daniel moved through the crowd with his glass and his quiet presence, shaking hands, nodding, doing what he always did, holding space without demanding it. Vanessa was at the center of everything, the way she always was, luminous, magnetic, entirely in her element. He watched her from across the room and thought, I love her. Even now. Even after everything. I still love her. And then she raised her glass, and then she spoke. Let's be honest, she said. Everything in this room, I built. Not us. Me. The laughter came. He's a good man, she added. But let's not pretend he had anything to do with where I am today. More laughter. Someone near the back actually applauded. Daniel looked down at his glass. He looked up at his wife. He looked around at the room full of people who had eaten meals he had cooked, who had attended parties he had helped plan, who had benefited from, connections he had quietly built. And in that moment, the last thread of something, hope, maybe, or patience, or the stubborn refusal to accept what had been visible for years, finally gave way. He placed his glass on a nearby table. He straightened his jacket. He walked to the door. Vanessa saw him go. Their eyes met once across the room. She smiled, small, certain, like a woman who had watched this scene play out before and already knew the ending. She was wrong about the ending. If you're still watching up to now, type "I'm still here" in the comment section. This story is just getting started. He didn't go home that night. He drove to the waterfront and sat in his car for 3 hours, watching the lights on the water, letting the full weight of 7 years finally settle into his chest without fighting it. At 2 a.m., he made 3 decisions. The first was to leave. The second was to do it right. The third was to never raise his voice about any of it. When he returned home the next morning, Vanessa was in the kitchen with her phone, scrolling through comments about the party. She looked up when he walked in. "You left early," she said. "I did," he replied. She waited, as though expecting the rest of the sentence, the apology, the confrontation, the performance of hurt that she had grown accustomed to managing. It didn't come. Daniel poured himself water, sat at the kitchen table, and opened his laptop. Vanessa watched him for a moment. Then she said lightly, "Are you upset?" "No," he said. And he meant it. What he was clear. Over the next 3 months, Daniel moved through his life with a precision that he had always possessed, but never before directed at himself. He consulted a lawyer, not a flashy one, but a careful one, the kind who read every page and charged accordingly. He gathered documents, 7 years of bank statements showing the flow of money he had contributed to, Van, the savings he had liquidated, the personal loans he had taken to cover her early shortfalls, emails, hundreds of them, in which he had negotiated on her behalf, managed her accounts, counseled her on decisions that had turned into millions. He found the original agreement, a document Vanessa had long forgotten, in which they had agreed, in writing, that any investment either party made in a shared venture would constitute a marital asset. He found signed checks. He found wire transfers. He found a paper trail so complete, so meticulous, that his lawyer, a woman named Adais, who had handled 200 divorce cases, put down the folder and looked at him across her desk with something approaching awe. "How long have you been keeping these?" she asked. 7 years, he said. "I always kept records. I just didn't know why until now." Adaiza leaned back in her chair. "Mr. Okoye," she said quietly, "your wife's lawyers are going to be very surprised." He filed for divorce on a Thursday morning. He sent Vanessa a message that simply said, "The papers are coming. I hope we can do this with dignity." She called him 11 times in the next 2 hours. He didn't answer. When she finally reached him that evening, her voice had shifted from shock into a register he recognized, the one she used when she needed to reframe a situation on her terms. "Daniel, we don't need to do this. Whatever I said at the party, it was the champagne. You know how I get. You know I appreciate you." "I know," he said. "But I also know it wasn't the champagne." A long silence. "What do you want?" she asked. And for the first time in a very long time, the fire was gone from her voice. She sounded like a woman who was beginning to understand that she was not standing on solid ground. "What I want," Daniel said, "is what was always mine." The courtroom was smaller than people expected for a case of this size. Vanessa arrived with 3 lawyers and the quiet confidence of a woman who had never lost a public battle. She wore a black suit and minimal jewelry. Her PR team had advised her to look subdued, relatable, wronged. Her legal strategy was straightforward. Daniel was a supportive spouse, yes, but Van was her intellectual creation, her personal brand, her vision. He had been a helpful partner, nothing more. What he was claiming, a significant share of the business, was opportunistic, emotional, and unsupported by evidence. It was a compelling strategy. For about 40 minutes. Then Adiz stood up. She began quietly. A bank statement. A transfer from Daniel's personal account to Van's company account on the 14th of March, 7 years ago. 300,000 naira. The amount that had funded the second collection. The collection that had launched the brand into the public eye. Vanessa's lead lawyer objected. Personal generosity, he said, does not constitute a business investment. Adiz nodded pleasantly and produced the written agreement signed by both parties in which they had defined exactly that transfer, and others like it, as a shared marital investment in a joint venture. The objection died in the air. Then came the emails. An entire folder of correspondence, some of it between Daniel and investors, Vanessa had publicly credited as her own discoveries. Emails showing Daniel negotiating terms, Daniel raising concerns, Daniel catching a clause in a distribution contract that, had it been signed as written, would have cost Van its international rights. These are private communications, Vanessa's lawyer said. They don't establish ownership. They establish contribution, Adiz replied. Consistent, documented, material contribution over 7 years. She produced the lease negotiation for the flagship store, Daniel's name on every draft, his financial references used to secure the property. She produced the signed personal loan documents, money borrowed against Daniel's name, not Vanessa's, during a cash flow crisis in year 3. She produced testimony from Van's original accountant, who stated under oath that for the first 4 years of the business, Daniel Okoye had been the primary financial architect of the company's structure. The courtroom had gone very quiet. Vanessa was looking at the table in front of her. Then Adiz did something no one expected. She played a recording. It was from a podcast interview Vanessa had given 2 years earlier. One of those intimate, candid conversations that ambitious women do to build connection with their audiences. The host had asked her about her support system, and Vanessa, in a moment of unscripted warmth, had said, "Honestly, my husband is the reason Van survived the first 3 years. I don't say it enough publicly because people don't want to hear that story. They want the solo warrior narrative, but Daniel kept the lights on when I couldn't. He believed in this more than I did on the hard days." The silence in the courtroom was total. Vanessa closed her eyes. Her lead lawyer put his pen down, and Daniel, sitting very still in his chair, felt nothing dramatic. Not triumph, not satisfaction. Just a quiet, enormous sense of being seen. Finally, fully, in the right room, by the right people, for the first time. If this moment gave you chills, drop a comment below. And if you haven't subscribed yet, now is the time. Hit that subscribe button and the bell so you never miss a story like this. The judge deliberated for 12 days. When she returned to the courtroom, her face was unreadable. She set her papers on the bench with the calm precision of someone who had made a decision she was entirely at peace with. She began with a statement that those present would later repeat in hushed conversations for months. In cases of marital property, she said, the law does not recognize the loudest voice. It recognizes the clearest evidence, and the evidence in this case is not ambiguous. She awarded Daniel a 40% stake in Van's total assets, an amount that, at current valuation, represented a life-changing sum. She awarded him the residential property they had shared, which had been purchased with his premarital savings. She noted in her ruling that the documentary evidence presented demonstrated a pattern of consistent material contribution that the respondent had repeatedly failed to acknowledge, and that such failure, while not legally actionable on its own, spoke directly to the question of equitable distribution. When the ruling ended, Vanessa sat very still. Her lawyers were already leaning toward her, speaking in urgent whispers about appeals. She wasn't listening to them. She was watching Daniel, who had risen from his seat and was buttoning his jacket with the same quiet composure he had carried into that room. Their eyes met. Neither of them spoke. But in the brief, heavy silence between them, something was exchanged that no courtroom could have adjudicated. The full accounting of a marriage, its gifts, its costs, its waste, and what remained when everything else had been divided. Then Daniel turned and walked toward the door, the same way he had walked out of that party, the same direction, but a completely different man. He didn't hold a press conference. He didn't give an interview. He didn't post anything on social media. Some of Vanessa's supporters tried to construct a narrative in the weeks that followed, a story about a bitter man who had used the courts to punish a successful woman. It got some traction online, the way those stories always do. People who had never met either of them formed strong opinions from limited information. Daniel read some of it and felt nothing that surprised him. He had spent 7 years learning not to need the room's approval. He used part of his settlement to launch his own financial advisory firm, something he had considered for years, but kept deferring, always finding a reason why Vanessa's needs came first. The firm was small in its first year. It grew quickly. He was, as he had always been, someone who understood how to build things. He moved into an apartment on the 4th floor of a building near the water, not large, not ostentatious, but full of morning light. He cooked his own meals. He kept his own schedule. He called his mother every Sunday. He ran 3 kilometers every morning before the city woke up, and in those early morning silences, he felt consistently something he hadn't felt in years. Peace. He did not hate Vanessa. That was the thing people found difficult to believe when he eventually spoke about it. Once, carefully, in a private conversation with a close friend who had been there at the party. "Do you hate her?" his friend asked. "No," Daniel said. "I understand her. That's different." "How can you understand someone who did that to you?" Daniel was quiet for a moment. "Vanessa needed to be the whole story," he said. "That's not malice. That's fear. She was terrified that if people knew how much help she needed, how much I was part of it, it would take something away from her. And I understood that fear. I just finally stopped paying for it." His friend looked at him for a long moment. "You know what the strangest part of this whole thing is?" his friend said. "You sound freer than you've been in years." "That's because I am," Daniel said simply. And it was true. What Daniel had learned, slowly, painfully, and then all at once in a single moment in a courtroom, was something that cannot be taught and cannot be rushed. It is only ever understood by living through it. Not every loss is a tragedy. Some losses are exits. Some exits are returns. And some returns to yourself, to your dignity, to the quiet certainty of who you are the most important arrivals of your life. He had walked out of that party invisible. He had walked out of that courtroom known. And he had walked into the rest of his life, finally, completely, free. If Daniel's story stayed with you, if some part of it felt familiar, felt true, felt like something you needed to hear today, then you already know why stories like this matter. We tell them because silence is not weakness, because patience is not passivity, because the people who build the foundation are just as important as the ones who stand on it. If you were in Daniel's position, would you have walked away sooner? Or would you have stayed, hoping it would change? Tell us in the comments. We read every single one. And if this story moved you, if it made you think, or feel, or see something differently, please like this video and subscribe to this channel. Hit the notification bell so you never miss what's coming next, because the next story is already waiting for you, and it might change how you see everything.